So what happens when you mix dynamite, a case of mistaken identity, and an overwhelming desire to change the world? Well, you get the Nobel Prize. It's the ultimate symbol of human achievement, right? But believe me, behind that iconic gold medal is a story that's just full of paradoxes, secrecy, and some really fascinating details.
And it all comes back to this one single sentence. This is from Alfred Nobel's will, and it's the mission statement, the whole guiding principle for what would become, the most prestigious award on Earth. The goal was simple, but wow, was it ambitious? Reward the people who do the most good for all of humanity.
All right, so here's our game plan for today. First, we're going to look at the surprising guy who started it all. Then, we'll peel back the curtain on the secret selection process. We'll also see what winners actually take home. It's more than you think. After that, we'll crunch some numbers, dive headfirst into the controversies, and finally, try to figure out the real legacy of this iconic prize.
All right, first up, the man behind the prize. So, who was Alfred Nobel? I mean, you'd probably guess he was some lifelong pacifist, right? Or maybe a famous professor. Well, the real story? It's a whole lot more complicated than that.
The thing is, Alfred Nobel was this brilliant chemist and engineer. He's the guy who invented dynamite. And yeah, his work totally changed construction and mining, but it also had some pretty obvious military uses. In fact, he owned Bofors, which was a huge arms factory. So he made an absolute fortune from his 355 patents, many of which had to do with making things go boom.
Okay, now this is where the story gets kind of wild, almost like something out of a movie. In 1888, Nobel's brother Ludwig passes away. But a French newspaper gets them mixed up and accidentally prints Alfred's obituary. And the headline, get this, was, "The Merchant of Death is Dead." Ouch. So the story goes that reading this and seeing how he'd be remembered as a war profiteer absolutely horrified him. It supposedly shocked him into completely rewriting his will to create a totally different legacy. Now, historians still debate if this is exactly how it went down, but honestly, it's such a powerful tale about what can push someone to change their entire story. And we're not talking about a small donation here. Nobel went all in. He committed 94%, practically his entire fortune, to this idea. Back in 1895, that was 31 million Swedish kroner, which was an astronomical amount of money. I mean, it was an absolutely staggering decision. It shocked his family, it shocked the world, and it laid the groundwork for the prizes we all know today.
Okay, so you have this massive fortune. How does that actually turn into someone winning a Nobel Prize? Well, that brings us to the selection process. And you can't just, apply for one. It's this super secret, year-long process that's just steeped in tradition.
So here's how it works. Every single year, it kicks off with about 3,000 nomination invites sent out to top-tier academics, government leaders, even former Nobel winners. From this huge pool, the Nobel committees have the tough job of narrowing it down to around 300 potential laureates. After that, it's months and months of deep expert review. Finally, the big institutions, like the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, cast their final votes. And when they decide, that's it. The decision is final. And get this. To stop any kind of lobbying or wild speculation, the entire process is kept completely secret for 50 years. Yeah, 50. Everything, who was nominated, who nominated them, what the committee talked about, it's all sealed. It adds this incredible layer of mystique to the whole thing, doesn't it?
So what do you actually get if you win? I mean, it's not just about bragging rights. On December 10th, which is the anniversary of Alfred Nobel's death, the winners receive this incredible trio of awards. First up, of course, is that iconic gold medal. And there's this amazing story that just perfectly captures what it represents. During World War II, when the Nazis rolled into Denmark, a chemist named George de Hevesy had to hide the medals of 2 German winners. So what did he do? He dissolved them in acid. Just poof, gone. Then, after the war was over, he literally precipitated the gold right back out of the liquid, and the Nobel Foundation was able to recast the exact same medals. How incredible is that? Next, the winners get a diploma. But this is not your average, framed certificate. Nope, each one is a one-of-a-kind piece of art. It's custom designed by Swedish and Norwegian artists just for that specific laureate. So it's this deeply personal, totally priceless piece of craftsmanship.
And last but not least, there's the prize money. As of 2023, we're talking about 11 million Swedish kroner, which is over $1 million US. Now, that amount has gone up and down over the years based on how the Nobel Foundation's investments are doing, but the goal is always the same: to give these brilliant people the financial freedom to just keep doing their amazing work without having to worry about money. All right. When you look at over a century of Nobel history, some really interesting patterns and records to start to pop out. So let's do a little dive into the laureates by the numbers. And you find some real record breakers in here. I mean, you've got Marie Curie, the only person to ever win in 2 different scientific fields, and her family, the Curies. They've collected 5 prizes among them. The age range is just incredible, too. You've got Malala Yousafzai winning at just 17, and then John Goodenough winning at 97. It really just goes to show you that a major breakthrough can happen at literally any point in your life.
Now, if you break it down by country, a pretty clear pattern emerges. The United States is way out in front, followed by the UK and Germany. This definitely reflects, historical trends and things like research funding and university systems, but it also kind of makes you stop and think, right? What does this mean for global representation today?
And that leads us to a statistic that's, well, it's pretty stark. If you just look at the science prizes, the gender gap is just massive. Between 1901 and 2018, a whopping 96% of the winners were men. Only 4% were women. It's a number that really shines a light on some deep, historical biases in the academic world. And it's something the Nobel committees are definitely hearing a lot of criticism about.
Okay, so for all its fame and prestige, the Nobel Prize is far from perfect. It has a history filled with some really intense controversies. In fact, some of the committee's decisions have triggered global debates and even led to members resigning in protest.
And a lot of these controversies, particularly with the Peace Prize, boil down to this gap between what the prize hopes for and what's actually happening on the ground. Take Henry Kissinger in 1973. He got the prize for a ceasefire in Vietnam while the war was still very much going on. 2 committee members quit over that one. Then in 1994, Yasser Arafat won for his part in the peace efforts with Israel. And that was so controversial that another committee member resigned, calling him a terrorist.
The history of the prize is also defined by the people who didn't win. Think about Mahatma Gandhi, the ultimate symbol of nonviolence. He was nominated 5 times and never won. The committee itself later admitted this was their greatest omission. And in literature, absolute giants like Leo Tolstoy, James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, they were all overlooked. Same in science, where crucial contributors like Lise Meitner, who was central to discovering nuclear fission, were just completely ignored, often because of the biases and politics of that era.
And then you have the really rare cases where people actually turned it down. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre refused the literature prize back in '64. He basically said that as a writer, he couldn't let himself be turned into an institution. Then there are the more tragic stories, like Boris Pasternak, who was literally forced by the Soviet Union to decline his literature prize in 1958. It just goes to show how this award can get caught up in the middle of huge geopolitical fights.
So after all that, the history, the secrecy, the controversies, what are we supposed to make of the Nobel Prize today? Well, it's a complicated picture. I mean, on the one hand, it is still the ultimate global symbol of achievement. It inspires generations of scientists, writers, and peacemakers to do incredible things. But on the other hand, its history makes it crystal clear that this is a very human institution. It's got flaws, it's been subject to politics, and it has had its share of blind spots. It really does reflect both our greatest triumphs and our most human imperfections.
And that really leaves us with one big question to think about. That original mission from Alfred Nobel's will to benefit mankind is probably more important now than ever before. But what does that mean today in our rapidly changing world? Is the greatest benefit a breakthrough in AI, a new way to tackle climate change, a brilliant idea to fight disinformation? The biggest challenge for the Nobel Prize, really, is to keep finding the right answer to that question year after year.